señora Cristina Mais.
Thank you very much, Cristina Mais.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to thank the petitioners for coming to Brussels and to coming to this committee and to explain a situation to us. A situation which is very difficult, a situation which is very difficult and which nobody denies. The Spanish government is trying to deal with it, something which is not easy to solve in the short term. But I know, because this is a real problem, and I understand that the government, the minister, the housing minister, the Isabel Rodriguez, said that, of course, on her list of priorities, there is to deal with the squatters of small and medium-sized property owners. We have a problem, a structural problem with housing. Only 3% of the housing is public housing, and that is a huge a problem. It's not only today's government that is to blame. Over the years, even the People's Party, with their liberal policies, they did not want to invest in public housing. This government has been in charge for 5 years, but we've already set up a program for 200,000 homes to become part of public housing. So this makes it possible for us to have more public housing, to face up for young families, for lower-income families to have access to a home, and to put a stop to the price of property in the urban areas. So it is the intention of the government to deal with this situation. We're not turning our back on it. We have shown our awareness, and you need to understand that the procedures are not always flexible and agile. But I spoke to the petitioners. We had a very interesting meeting with them, or at least it was interesting for me. I mean, everything, it's not exactly correct what you say in your petition, because in the royal decree, the government said that there was going to be a stop to an increase in rents. But that was not going to affect the people that are represented here today as petitioners. This vulnerability should be taken into account only for those who own a large number of properties. And we need to also understand a further thing. One thing is squatting on purpose, squatting, proper squatters, and this, of course, needs to be prevented. An end needs to be put to this. But the second point is the issue of vulnerability of very many people who, under certain circumstances, may find themselves affected by this. So the government needs to juggle with these two situations. On the one hand, we need to ensure that the people have the right to housing as anchored in the Constitution, and we need to solve these urgent issues. It's not true that we've stopped the removal of squatters because for the small owners, and there is compensation. I know this is not enough because the rent is much higher than the compensation, but it is something that at least covers part of your damage. The government is already doing part of its work, and so what the government needs to do is to protect those small owners who they have invested their savings in order to improve their income through rents. On the other hand, we need to help the vulnerable individuals or vulnerable households. And sometimes people are neither one or the other and try to take advantage of this. And I'm not only talking about squatters, but others who make it harder, especially those who are investing in the housing sector, because it is, after all, many of these vulture funds or funds in general that invest in the housing sector, and they can deal with certain tenants, and they make it even harder for the young families or those families that are not so young who find it very difficult to be owners or to find a decent place to live by paying a rent. And if you go to Madrid or anywhere else, you'll find out that this is true. Minister Rodriguez, I surely believe that we should give her the benefit of the doubt. We need to let her work in her first 100 days. But in one of the first statements he made, there was going to be an investment of 4 billion houses going to be built, social housing, to increase the number of accessible property. And that is what we need to continue working on, so that young people, people with lower income families can have access to housing, and that these families that suffer this occupation, this tenant occupation, well, they need to get the compensation. My support, my sympathy, and our commitment to continue working from the institutions to solve this serious injustice. And I wanted to keep this petition open, of course.
Gut, vielen Dank. Ich bitte, weil wir alle.
Thank you very much. I would be grateful if colleagues could be a little more concise so that everyone can take the floor. Mr. Cañas, please.
Sie haben das Wort.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the petitioners. Unfortunately, they have had to bring a very concerning topic to us here, and that is an attack on fundamental rights. Now, the Commission representative was saying that the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, in its articles, talks about a right to housing. There is also a right to property that is mentioned. So there are two different rights here, the right to housing and the right to property, and both should be respected. The petitioners here are saying that the right to property is not being upheld. The right to housing should not be upheld at the expense of property owners. It's a right that has to be upheld by the public authorities. So, who are the political powers, governments? For how long has a socialist government been in government in Spain since democracy began? 20 plus? So the public housing stock is a problem, but here we're looking at something else. We're looking at a government, and during an exceptional situation, it took exceptional measures, and that was that tenants who were, so to speak, vulnerable couldn't be evicted. So there were social policies that were introduced, but the people who had to pay for that were the property owners. So you have this headline which looks very good. We won't have any evictions. But who's going to pay the price for that measure? It will fall to the property owners, who were also expecting to make a legitimate rental income. They have to pay for utility bills, water, gas. They have to pay taxes. And then they have to declare income that they didn't even receive in their income tax return. It's surreal. So we're told, it's not easy to resolve these problems in the short term. Well, it would be easy not to cause them in the first place, because if you decide that because of an exceptional situation you're going to prevent what would be legal evictions, then you need to bear the cost of that. So you can take the tenant and the owner and say, I'm sorry, but I think this family is in a vulnerable situation. How much was the rent that they should be paying? 600, 700 euros, 1,000, 1,200? Well, there you are. And what was the cost of the services? There you go, 6 months. So you're not going to have your right to take back your property, but we will compensate you financially. But they're very clever, and they say, no, you can't evict anyone. You're banned on evictions, but you're going to pay for it as well. So this is not about vulture funds of any kind. We're talking about men and women who have a right to property, to their housing, and they have a right to receive an income for that property. This doesn't fly in the face of tenants and their rights. If somebody is in a vulnerable situation, that should be resolved, and we don't have housing stock, then what we need to do is to take on board the cost, because otherwise you're just passing on the cost to others. And I don't know, but I don't think that's a very progressive policy. So in summary, this is clearly an attack against Article 17 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which says that everyone has a right to enjoy property that has been legally acquired, which would apply to these people. You can't kind of get out of that because you say someone can't be evicted because they have a problem and they then don't bear the costs. So this is a European issue. Then there's the issue of case law. There's law in the ECHR as well. There are a number of different cases that have been ruled on because it's also against the Constitution. The right to decent housing can't be based on an attack on private property. It's down to the public authorities to uphold the right to housing. And even if this was put in place because of a pandemic, which is no longer with us, clearly what we have now is something which is political in nature. So if we're going to protect tenants who do pay and who are then subject to pressure from those who don't pay, and there may be landlords who are hesitant and put up rents or who put in place more prerequisites. You need to deal with this or oblige governments to take on the cost of their measures rather than the landowners, and that will benefit not only the legitimate landowners, it will also help tenants who are looking for somewhere to rent, because it will reduce the risk of arrears of non-payment and therefore the exceptional concerns that many landowners now have when it comes to renting out properties. So, as I was saying, the right to housing is a right, the right to property is something else, and squatting is a crime. Crimes need to be prosecuted, not protected. So I'd like this petition to be kept open. Thank you.
Gut, vielen Dank. Vielen Dank. Der nächste.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is